Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Perfect Facade. Daniel Emerson stood in his garage workshop, hands blackened with motor oil, the scent of metal and grease clinging to his work clothes. 23 years of marriage, and he still found solace in fixing things. Cars, motorcycles, anything with an engine. It was honest work, even if it wasn't glamorous. "Danny, I'm home." Victoria's voice echoed through the house, sharp and commanding. Gone was the sweet girl he'd married fresh out of college. The woman who walked through his door now wore designer clothes and carried herself like she owned the world. Victoria Emerson had climbed the corporate ladder at Meridian Industries with ruthless efficiency. From a junior accountant to senior vice president in 15 years. Impressive by any standard. What Daniel didn't know was how many rungs she'd stepped on to get there, or whose bed she'd warmed along the way. In the garage, "Vic," he called back, wiping his hands on a rag. She appeared in the doorway, her nose wrinkling in disgust. "God, Daniel, you smell like a mechanic." "I am working on the neighbor's bike. Pro bono." He'd been helping elderly Stanley Blake with his vintage Harley for weeks. Stanley was a retired Marine who couldn't afford shop rates, and Daniel had a soft spot for veterans. "You need to shower before dinner. Mother's coming over to discuss my promotion." Elizabeth Briggs, Victoria's mother, was a bitter woman who'd never forgiven Daniel for being beneath her daughter's station. She'd wanted Victoria to marry Christopher Schaefer, the golden boy from their country club. Instead, Victoria had chosen love over money. A decision Elizabeth reminded them of at every opportunity. That evening, Elizabeth sat at their dining table like a queen holding court. "Victoria, darling, tell me about the promotion party Friday." Victoria's eyes lit up. "It's going to be incredible. Christopher, Mr. Schaefer, is hosting it at the Riverside Country Club. All the company executives will be there, plus our biggest clients." "How wonderful," Elizabeth beamed. "And Daniel, I assume you'll be." "Actually," Victoria interrupted, her voice dropping, "it's a professional event. Very exclusive." Daniel looked up from his plate. Meaning it's not really appropriate for spouses who aren't in the industry." The lie hung in the air like smoke. Daniel had seen the invitation on the kitchen counter. "Mr. and Mrs. Christopher Schaefer request the pleasure of your company." It specifically mentioned spouses. "I see." Daniel's voice was calm, measured. 20 years in construction management had taught him when to observe and when to act. This was an observation moment. Elizabeth's smile turned predatory. "It's probably for the best, dear. These corporate affairs can be so stuffy. You'd be much more comfortable at home." After Elizabeth left, Daniel lay in bed, listening to Victoria's breathing beside him. She was already asleep, probably dreaming of her success. He'd built their life brick by brick, literally. His construction company had provided the stability that allowed her to take risks, to climb her ladder. Now she was embarrassed by the foundation he'd laid. His phone buzzed. A text from his old Army buddy, Neil Draper. "Still want that favor I owe you? Big opportunity coming up." Daniel stared at the ceiling. Neil worked in corporate acquisitions now, dealt with companies like Meridian Industries. They'd served together in Afghanistan, where Daniel had saved Neil's life during an IED attack. Some debts never expired. He typed back, "Maybe. Tell me more." Chapter 2. The Invitation Withdrawn. Friday arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that made everything seem possible. Daniel had taken the day off, telling Victoria he wanted to wish her luck. She'd seemed genuinely touched by the gesture, the first real emotion he'd seen from her in months. "You look beautiful," he said as she checked herself in the hallway mirror. And she did. The black cocktail dress hugged her figure perfectly, and her auburn hair was styled in an elegant updo. She looked like the successful executive she'd become. "Thank you." She kissed his cheek, careful not to disturb her lipstick. "I should be home by midnight." "Enjoy your night, Vic. You've earned it." After she left, Daniel made a phone call. "Stanley? It's Dan. You mentioned you had some old military friends who worked security, private investigators. I might need a consultation." 3 hours later, Stanley arrived with two men who looked like they could break concrete with their bare hands. Bruce Harding and Albert Gray, former Special Forces, now running a discreet investigation service. "What do you need, brother?" Bruce asked. Stanley had vouched for Daniel's character, which meant something in their circle. "My wife's at the Riverside Country Club. I need to know who she's really with." Albert raised an eyebrow. "You want surveillance?" "Photos. I want the truth." They were back in 2 hours with a manila envelope. Bruce's expression was grim. "You sure you want to see this?" Daniel opened the envelope. The photos told a story. Victoria arriving alone, then being greeted by Christopher Schaefer with a kiss that lasted too long. Their hands intertwined as they walked inside. Victoria throwing her head back in laughter at something Christopher whispered in her ear. The final photo, taken through a window, showed them in what appeared to be a private dining room. Christopher's hand on Victoria's thigh. "There's more," Albert said quietly. "They have a regular dinner every Tuesday at the Fairmont Hotel. Same room, same time. Has been going on for 8 months. 8 months. Daniel felt something cold settle in his chest. 8 months of lies, of Tuesday night client meetings and weekend corporate retreats. His phone rang. "Victoria." "Danny? I'm so sorry, but the party's running really late. I'm going to stay at Jenny's tonight rather than drive home tipsy. Is that okay?" Jenny Donovan, Victoria's college roommate who lived across town. Except Daniel knew Victoria wasn't going to Jenny's. "Of course, sweetheart. Drive safe." After he hung up, Stanley put a hand on his shoulder. "What are you thinking, son?" Daniel looked at the photos again. Victoria was radiant in them, happier than he'd seen her in years. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. This was a woman in love with someone else, someone who could give her the life she really wanted. "I'm thinking," Daniel said slowly, "that my wife just declared war. She just doesn't know it yet." Saturday morning, Victoria returned home with dark circles under her eyes and guilt written across her face. She'd expected Daniel to be angry, suspicious, demanding answers. Instead, he greeted her with coffee and scrambled eggs. "How was Jenny's?" he asked casually. "Fine. We stayed up too late talking." The lies came easily now. "I have some news," Daniel said, settling into his chair. "Neil Draper called yesterday. You remember Neil from my Army days? He's with Morrison and Associates now. They handle corporate acquisitions." Victoria nodded absently, scrolling through her phone. "They're looking for someone to head up their new construction division. Government contracts, private development. It's a big opportunity." "That's nice, honey." She wasn't really listening. Daniel smiled. "The interview's Monday, at Meridian Industries." Victoria's head snapped up. "What?" "Morrison and Associates is acquiring companies in the region. Meridian Industries is one of their targets for a potential partnership. Neil thought it would be perfect, me heading up construction, working with companies I already understand." The color drained from Victoria's face. "You can't interview at my company." "Why not?" Because it would be awkward. People might think I got you the job." Daniel tilted his head, studying her. "Would that be so bad? Being known as the woman whose husband was qualified enough to be recruited by Morrison and Associates." Victoria stood abruptly. "I need a shower." As water ran upstairs, Daniel opened his laptop and began researching. Christopher Schaefer, 42, divorced, senior vice president of operations. He lived in a penthouse downtown, drove a BMW, and had a reputation as a corporate shark. He was also, according to several business articles, aggressively pursuing a promotion to regional director. The same position Neil had mentioned Morrison and Associates was looking to fill. Daniel's phone buzzed with a text from Bruce. "Found something interesting. Schaefer's been telling people he's getting married soon. To a beautiful executive at his company. No name given, but..." Daniel set the phone down and looked out the window. Victoria had chosen her side. Now it was time to choose his. Chapter 3. The Setup. Monday morning, Daniel put on his best suit, the charcoal gray one Victoria had bought him for her last Christmas party. He'd always felt uncomfortable in it, like he was playing dress-up. Today, it felt like armor. Meridian Industries occupied 3 floors of a gleaming downtown tower. Daniel rode the elevator to the 15th floor, watching the city shrink below him. He'd built half those buildings, but he'd never seen them from this perspective. Neil Draper was waiting in the lobby, looking every inch the successful corporate executive. They'd kept in touch over the years, but Daniel was still struck by the transformation from the dusty soldier he'd known in Afghanistan. "Danny boy," Neil grinned, extending his hand. "Ready to join the dark side?" "That depends. How dark are we talking?" Neil's smile faltered slightly. "What do you mean?" I know about Victoria and Christopher Schaefer. I know about their Tuesday dinners and weekend getaways. I know about the promotion party I wasn't invited to." Neil whistled low. "Jesus, Danny. I'm sorry. I had no idea." "Don't be sorry. Be useful." Daniel's voice was steady, controlled. "You said Morrison and Associates is looking at Meridian for acquisition. What does that mean for current management?" "It means a lot of changes. New leadership, restructuring, performance reviews." Neil paused, understanding dawning in his eyes. "Danny, if you're thinking what I think you're thinking, I'm thinking my wife chose her career over our marriage. I'm thinking Christopher Schaefer is about to learn that some people fight back." They were interrupted by commotion near the elevators. Victoria emerged, looking harried and stressed. She was talking rapidly to a younger woman, Christina Hunter, according to the nameplate on her desk. "The Morrison meeting got moved up," Victoria was saying. "Christopher's freaking out about the presentation. Can you pull the quarterly reports?" And she stopped mid-sentence, her eyes locking with Daniel's across the lobby. For a moment, neither moved. Then Victoria straightened, putting on her professional mask. She walked over with the confidence of someone on home turf. "Daniel, what are you doing here?" "Interview," he said simply. "Victoria Emerson. Meet Neil Draper from Morrison and Associates." "Neil, my wife Victoria." Neil extended his hand with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Emerson. Your husband speaks of you often." Victoria shook his hand mechanically, her mind clearly racing. "I wasn't aware Daniel was interviewing here." "Last-minute opening," Neil said smoothly. "We need someone with extensive construction experience for our expansion plans." Daniel's reputation speaks for itself. "What expansion plans?" Victoria's voice was sharp. Before Neil could answer, Christopher Schaefer appeared. He was exactly what Daniel had expected. Tall, polished, wearing a suit that cost more than most people's monthly salary. His smile was practiced, political. "Is this about the Morrison meeting?" Christopher asked, then noticed Daniel. "I don't believe we've met." Daniel stood, extending his hand. "Daniel Emerson, Victoria's husband." Christopher's grip was firm, but Daniel felt the slight tremor of surprise. "Christopher Schaefer, Senior VP of Operations. I've heard so much about you." "Funny," Daniel replied. "Victoria never mentions you at all." The silence stretched uncomfortably. Victoria looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. "Well," Neil said, breaking the tension, "we should get to that interview. Nice meeting you both." As they walked toward the conference room, Daniel heard Victoria hiss something to Christopher about complications and not planned. The interview itself was a formality. Neil had already explained the situation to his colleagues. Daniel was being brought in as Regional Director of Construction, overseeing all building projects for Morrison and Associates' newly acquired properties. It was a position that would put him in direct contact with companies like Meridian Industries. "The appointment becomes official next Friday," Neil explained afterward. "We're having a small company event to announce the new leadership structure. Very exclusive. Clients, partners, key personnel. Will Meridian Industries be there?" "Of course." Christopher Schaefer's been angling for the regional director position himself. "He doesn't know we've already filled it." Daniel smiled for the first time in days. "I imagine Friday will be quite educational for him." That evening, Victoria was unusually quiet during dinner. She picked at her food, clearly distracted. "How was your day?" Daniel asked. "Fine." She didn't look up from her plate. "Mine was interesting. Got the job." That got her attention. "What job?" "Regional Director of Construction for Morrison and Associates. I start Monday." Victoria's fork clattered against her plate. "You can't be serious." "Dead serious. Neil says it's a great opportunity to work with local companies, build partnerships. I might even get to work directly with Meridian Industries." "Daniel, this could be really complicated." "Why?" "Because people might think I'm using my wife's connections." He leaned back in his chair, studying her face. "Or because you're worried I might learn something you don't want me to know?" Victoria's cheeks flushed. I don't know what you mean. Don't you? Daniel stood, carrying his plate to the sink. By the way, Neil mentioned there's a company event Friday night. Very exclusive. He insisted I bring my wife. Victoria's face went white. I might have to work late Friday. That's a shame, Daniel said, rinsing his plate. I was looking forward to introducing you to my new colleagues, especially the ones from Meridian Industries. He left her sitting at the table, staring into space. Upstairs, he could hear her making frantic phone calls. The first was to Christopher, her voice low and urgent. The second was to her mother. Daniel didn't try to listen. He didn't need to. The trap was set. Friday would tell him everything he needed to know about where his wife's loyalty truly lay. Chapter 4. The Gathering Storm. Thursday evening, Daniel sat at his workshop, but he wasn't fixing engines. Spread across his workbench were documents Neil had provided, Meridian Industries organizational charts, financial reports, and personnel files. Christopher Schaefer's profile made for interesting reading. The man was ambitious to the point of recklessness. He'd made enemies climbing the corporate ladder, stepping on colleagues and subordinates alike. His divorce 2 years ago had been contentious. His ex-wife, Melanie Donaldson, had accused him of serial infidelity and emotional abuse. The settlement had been sealed, but Neil's contacts had provided the highlights. Studying the enemy, Daniel looked up to find Stanley Blake in the doorway, 2 bottles of beer in his hands. Something like that. Daniel accepted the beer gratefully. What brings you by? Bruce called. Said you might need backup tomorrow night. Daniel raised an eyebrow. I'm attending a corporate party, not storming a beach. Stanley's weathered face cracked a smile. Son, I've been married 3 times. Sometimes they're the same thing. They drank in comfortable silence for a while. Finally, Stanley spoke again. You sure about this path you're walking? Once you start down this road, there's no going back. She already made that choice for both of us, Daniel said quietly. 8 months ago, when she decided Christopher Schaefer was worth more than 23 years of marriage. And if she comes clean, asks for forgiveness. Daniel's expression didn't change. Stanley, in Afghanistan, if someone betrayed the squad, what happened to them? They didn't make a home. Exactly. Some betrayals can't be forgiven. Some bridges once burned can't be rebuilt. Victoria's behavior had grown increasingly erratic as Friday approached. She'd tried 3 different excuses to avoid the Morrison event: sudden illness, last-minute work crisis, even a fictional family emergency. When Daniel calmly shot down each excuse with perfect logic, she'd retreated into sullen silence. Friday morning, she made one last attempt. Daniel, I really think it would be better if I stayed home tonight. These corporate events can be so political. You're right, Daniel agreed, nodding his tie. They can be. That's why I need my wife there, to help me navigate the politics. But what if? What if what, Victoria? He turned to face her, his expression patient but implacable. What if people see us together? What if they realize we're married? What if they wonder why the woman who's been having an affair for 8 months looks guilty standing next to her husband? The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Victoria's face went through a spectrum of emotions: shock, fear, anger, and finally, resignation. You know, she whispered. I know, Daniel confirmed. I know about the Tuesday dinners at the Fairmont. I know about the weekend trips. I know about the promotion party I wasn't invited to because you were embarrassed to be seen with me. I know Christopher Schaefer has been telling people he's getting married soon. Victoria collapsed into a chair, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. How long have you known? Since the night you lied about staying at Jenny's. Are you going to divorce me? Daniel considered the question. That depends. On what? On whether you're prepared to face the consequences of your choices. Before Victoria could respond, Daniel's phone rang. Neil, change of plans for tonight, Neil said without preamble. The venue moved to the Riverside Country Club. Apparently, Christopher Schaefer insisted, said he had connections there that could help seal some deals. The same place Victoria's promotion party was held? The very same. Interesting coincidence, don't you think? After hanging up, Daniel smiled at Victoria's stricken expression. Good news, sweetheart. Tonight's event is at the Riverside Country Club. You should feel right at home. The Riverside Country Club's main ballroom was a testament to old money and older connections. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over clusters of executives and politicians, their conversations a steady murmur of deal-making and networking. Daniel entered with Victoria on his arm, and he felt the subtle shift in the room's energy. Heads turned, whispers started. Victoria was well known here, but not with a husband in tow. "Mr. Emerson." Neil appeared with a broad smile and 2 champagne flutes. "So glad you could make it. And Mrs. Emerson, you look lovely." Victoria managed a weak smile. "Thank you. Let me introduce you around," Neil said, leading them toward a group of executives. "These are the key players in our expansion plans." As they moved through the crowd, Daniel noticed Christopher Schaefer across the room. The man was holding court near the bar, gesticulating animatedly as he spoke to a group of younger executives. He hadn't noticed Victoria's arrival yet. "Ah, there's someone you need to meet," Neil said, steering them toward an older woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper smile. "Daniel, this is Elizabeth Cooley, Morrison & Associates Senior Vice President." "Elizabeth, our new Regional Director of Construction, Daniel Emerson." Elizabeth extended a manicured hand. "Mr. Emerson, Neil's told me wonderful things about your background. 20 years in construction management, Army engineering experience, and a reputation for completing projects ahead of schedule and under budget." "I try to deliver what I promise," Daniel replied. "How refreshing. So many people in this business make promises they can't keep." Her eyes flicked to Victoria. "And you must be Mrs. Emerson. How wonderful that you can be here to support your husband's new position." Victoria forced another smile. "Yes, I'm very proud of Daniel." "As you should be. Neil tells me you work for Meridian Industries. We're hoping to develop a strong partnership with your company." "Victoria is actually the senior VP there," Daniel said proudly. "She's been instrumental in their recent growth." "How impressive. A true power couple." Elizabeth's smile could have cut glass. "I'm sure you'll both be invaluable as we move forward." As Elizabeth excused herself, Victoria grabbed Daniel's arm. "I need some air." They stepped onto the club's terrace, where the October night was crisp and clear. Victoria leaned against the railing, her hands shaking slightly. "Daniel." "Victoria." They turned to see Christopher Schaefer approaching, his face flushed with alcohol and excitement. He stopped short when he saw Daniel. "Christopher," Victoria said weakly. "I'd like you to meet my husband, Daniel Emerson." Christopher's expression shifted through confusion, recognition, and finally understanding. "Your husband, the one from the other day." "The Regional Director of Construction for Morrison & Associates," Daniel clarified. "I believe we'll be working together quite closely." The blood drained from Christopher's face. "Regional Director? But I was told that you were being considered for the position." Daniel's smile was cold. "I'm sure you were. Unfortunately, Morrison & Associates decided to go with someone who had more comprehensive experience." Christopher looked between Daniel and Victoria, the implications hitting him like physical blows. "Victoria, you didn't tell me your husband was." "Was what?" Daniel interrupted. "Qualified, successful, capable of providing for his wife without requiring her to compromise her integrity." The silence stretched until Christopher's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his face went completely white. "Excuse me," he mumbled, fleeing back into the ballroom. Victoria watched him go, then turned to Daniel. "What did you do?" "Nothing yet," Daniel replied. "But the night is young." Chapter 5, The Reckoning. Inside the ballroom, Christopher Schaefer stood in the corner, frantically typing on his phone. His conversation with his assistant, Ricardo Spears, was brief but devastating. "The Morrison acquisition is moving faster than expected," Ricardo said. "They're announcing a complete management restructuring Monday. Word is anyone who isn't considered essential personnel will be reassigned." Christopher's hands shook as he hung up. Reassigned was corporate speak for fired. His whole strategy had been to position himself as indispensable for the Morrison partnership. Now Daniel Emerson, Victoria's husband, was the key Morrison representative. He'd been outmaneuvered, and he didn't even know how. "Christopher, you look like you've seen a ghost." He turned to find Elizabeth coolly approaching with a predatory smile. "Miss Cooley, I was hoping we could discuss. The regional director position? Elizabeth interrupted. I'm afraid that's been filled, though I understand you were quite confident about your prospects. Christopher forced a laugh. Business is business. I'm sure Daniel Emerson is qualified. Oh, he's more than qualified. 20 years of construction management, Army engineering background, and according to his references, absolutely ruthless when it comes to completing objectives. Elizabeth paused. The kind of man who never leaves a job unfinished. The implication hung in the air. Christopher excused himself and headed for the bar, needing something stronger than champagne. Meanwhile, Daniel was working the room with the skill of a man who understood that war was often won with handshakes and small talk. He introduced himself to Meridian executives, many of whom knew Victoria but had never met her mysterious husband. So you're the famous Daniel Emerson, said Johanna Bryan, Meridian's CFO. Victoria talks about you all the time. Does she? Daniel smiled. All good things, I hope. Oh yes. She's always mentioning how hard you work, how dedicated you are to your projects. Johanna lowered her voice conspiratorially. Between you and me, some of us were starting to think you were made up. Victoria's so private about her personal life. She's always been focused on her career, Daniel replied diplomatically. I admire that about her. Across the room, Victoria was trapped in a conversation with several Morrison executives who were praising her husband's qualifications. Each compliment felt like a knife twist. You must be so proud, said Orlando Davis, Morrison's legal counsel. Neil Draper speaks very highly of Daniel's integrity. Says he's the kind of man who values loyalty above everything else. Victoria's smile felt like it might crack her face. Yes, Daniel is very principled. That's so important in business, Orlando continued. Too many people these days are willing to compromise their values for short-term gains. It always catches up with them eventually. As the evening wore on, Daniel noticed Christopher's increasing desperation. The man was making the rounds, trying to salvage relationships and curry favor with Morrison executives. Each interaction seemed to leave him more dejected. Trouble in paradise? Neil appeared at Daniel's elbow. I wouldn't know, Daniel replied. I'm just here to meet my new business partners. Speaking of which, there's someone you need to meet. Neil gestured toward a distinguished older man near the windows. Anthony Sullivan, he owns half the construction contracts in the city. Also happens to be Christopher Schaefer's biggest client. They approached Sullivan, who greeted Neil warmly. Anthony, I'd like you to meet Daniel Emerson, our new regional director. Daniel, Anthony Sullivan of Sullivan Enterprises. Sullivan's handshake was firm, his eyes sharp and assessing. Emerson, that name sounds familiar. You might know my work, Daniel said. I've handled construction on several major projects in the city. The Riverside Medical Center expansion, the Harbor District redevelopment, the new courthouse downtown. Sullivan's eyebrows rose. You built the courthouse? That was completed 3 months ahead of schedule and significantly under budget. Excellent work. Thank you. I believe in delivering what I promise. A rare quality these days. Sullivan glanced across the room toward Christopher. Too many people in this business promise the moon and deliver disappointment. As they talked, Daniel learned that Sullivan had been growing increasingly frustrated with Christopher's management of their contracts. Delays, cost overruns, and communication failures had strained their relationship. I've been looking for new partnerships, Sullivan admitted. Someone more reliable. Morrison and Associates values reliability above all else, Daniel assured him. Perhaps we could discuss some collaboration opportunities. Meanwhile, Christopher had cornered Victoria near the ladies' room. What the hell is going on? He hissed. You never mentioned your husband was connected to Morrison and Associates. I didn't know, Victoria protested. This is all as much a surprise to me as it is to you. A surprise? Your husband just became my boss's boss, and you call it a surprise? Christopher, lower your voice. Don't tell me to lower my voice. Do you have any idea what this means? For us? For our plans? Victoria looked around nervously. What plans? We never made any concrete. I've been telling people I'm getting married. I put a deposit down on a house in Hillcrest. I turned down the job offer from Sinclair Industries, because you said we had a future together. Keep your voice down, Victoria whispered urgently. People are starting to stare. Let them stare. My career is over. And your husband who you said was just some blue-collar nobody, is the reason why. Ladies and gentlemen, Elizabeth Cooley's voice cut through the ballroom chatter. If I could have your attention, please. The crowd gathered around as Elizabeth stepped onto the small platform typically used by the club's orchestra. Thank you all for joining us tonight. Morrison & Associates is pleased to announce several exciting developments in our expansion into this market. Daniel felt Victoria tense beside him. First, we're pleased to announce our partnership with several local companies, including the prestigious Meridian Industries. Polite applause rippled through the crowd. Second, we're restructuring our regional operations to better serve our clients and partners. This will mean some changes in personnel and reporting structures. Christopher's face had gone ashen. Finally, I'd like to introduce our new Regional Director of Construction, Daniel Emerson. Daniel brings 20 years of construction management experience and will be overseeing all building projects for our regional operations. The applause was stronger this time. Daniel stepped forward slightly, acknowledging the recognition with a modest nod. Daniel will be working closely with our partner companies to ensure efficient, cost-effective project completion. I'm confident his leadership will benefit everyone in this room. As Elizabeth concluded her remarks, Daniel noticed several Meridian executives approaching. Among them was James Doherty, the company's CEO. Daniel, congratulations on the appointment, Doherty said, extending his hand. I look forward to working with you. Thank you, sir. I'm excited about the possibilities. Victoria's told us so much about your expertise. I had no idea we had such talent so close to home. Daniel smiled at Victoria, who looked like she might be sick. Victoria's always been my biggest supporter. As it should be, there's nothing more important than having a partner who believes in you. Doherty's words carried a weight that made Victoria flinch. I hope we can schedule a meeting soon to discuss potential collaborations. Of course, I'm particularly interested in streamlining project timelines and reducing costs. I believe efficiency benefits everyone. Excellent attitude. Christopher Schaefer has been handling our construction partnerships, but perhaps it's time for some fresh perspectives. Christopher, who had been listening from nearby, stepped forward. Mr. Doherty, I think there might be some confusion. No confusion at all, Christopher, Doherty replied coolly. Daniel's appointment changes our reporting structure. You'll be coordinating with him on all construction-related matters moving forward. The humiliation was complete. Christopher Schaefer, Senior Vice President, Victoria's lover, the man who'd been telling people he was getting married, was now subordinate to the husband he'd been cuckolding. If you'll excuse me, Christopher muttered, pushing through the crowd toward the exit. Victoria started to follow him, then stopped, realizing how it would look. She was trapped, caught between her husband's triumph and her lover's defeat. Victoria, Daniel said quietly, I think it's time we went home. She nodded mutely, allowing him to guide her toward the door. As they left, Daniel could hear the excited conversations behind them. People discussing new business opportunities, praising his qualifications, speculating about changes at Meridian Industries. In the parking lot, Victoria finally found her voice. Daniel, not here, he said firmly. We'll talk at home. The drive was silent except for the soft hum of the engine. Victoria stared out the window, watching the city lights blur past. Her carefully constructed world had crumbled in a single evening, and she was only beginning to understand the magnitude of her husband's victory. When they pulled into their driveway, Daniel turned off the engine but didn't move to get out. 23 years, he said quietly. 23 years of marriage, and you threw it away for a man who just discovered he's not as important as he thought he was. Victoria's voice was barely a whisper. I never meant for this to happen. Which part? The affair or getting caught? She had no answer for that. You made your choice, Victoria. Now you have to live with the consequences. Chapter 6, The Unraveling. Saturday morning brought an unexpected visitor. Daniel was in his workshop when he heard the doorbell ring, followed by Victoria's sharp intake of breath. Through the window, he could see Christopher Schaefer's BMW in the driveway. I'll handle this, Victoria said, but Daniel was already walking toward the front door. Christopher stood on the porch, disheveled and clearly drunk despite the early hour. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his hair uncombed, and his eyes held the wild look of a man whose world had collapsed overnight. "We need to talk," Christopher said, pushing past Victoria into the house. "I think you've said enough," Daniel replied calmly. "No, I haven't." Christopher spun around, his voice slurring slightly. "You planned this. All of this. The job, the party, the humiliation. It was all planned." Daniel closed the front door and leaned against it. "You give me too much credit, Christopher. I simply took advantage of opportunities that presented themselves." "Bullshit. You orchestrated this whole thing to destroy me." "I didn't have to destroy you," Daniel said, his voice cold as winter steel. "You destroyed yourself the moment you decided my wife was worth more than your integrity." Christopher's face flushed red. "You don't deserve her. She's brilliant, successful, ambitious, everything you're not." "And yet," Daniel smiled, "she's still married to me." The words hit Christopher like a physical blow. He turned to Victoria, desperation clear in his eyes. "Tell him, Victoria. Tell him about us, about our plans. Tell him you're leaving him." Victoria stood frozen between the two men, her face pale as parchment. "Christopher, you need to leave." "What?" "You heard her," Daniel said. "You need to leave. Now." Christopher's desperation turned to rage. "You can't do this. You can't just take everything from me." "I haven't taken anything from you," Daniel replied. "I've simply revealed what you really are, a man who seduces married women and makes promises he can't keep." "I love her." "No, you loved what she represented. Success, status, a trophy to prove your worth. But real love doesn't require destroying someone else's marriage." Christopher took a step toward Daniel, his hands clenched into fists. "You sanctimonious bastard." "I wouldn't," Daniel said quietly, and something in his voice made Christopher stop. "You're drunk, you're trespassing, and you're threatening me in my own home. Self-defense laws in this state are very generous to homeowners." The implication was clear. Christopher looked between Daniel and Victoria, seeing no support in either face. "This isn't over," he said finally. "Yes, it is," Daniel replied. "As of Monday morning, you'll be reporting to me on all construction-related matters. I suggest you review your current projects and prepare detailed status reports. I'll be conducting thorough audits to ensure everything meets Morrison and Associates standards." Christopher's face went white. "You can't." "I can. I will." "And Christopher," Daniel stepped closer, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, "if you ever set foot on my property again, if you ever contact my wife outside of work, if you even look at her wrong during business meetings, I will make your professional life so miserable that you'll be begging for the unemployment line." After Christopher left, Victoria sank into a chair, her hands shaking. "I need a drink," she said. "It's 10 in the morning." "I don't care." Daniel poured her a glass of wine, then sat across from her. "Tell me about the house in Hillcrest." Victoria's head snapped up. "What?" "Christopher mentioned putting a deposit down on a house. I assume he was expecting you to live there with him." Victoria's shoulders sagged. "It was just, we talked about it. Nothing concrete. Nothing concrete. Like your marriage vows." "Daniel, please." "Please what? Please forgive you? Please pretend the last 8 months didn't happen? Please act like you didn't choose another man over 23 years of marriage." Victoria started crying then, silent tears streaming down her face. "I don't know what to do." "That's simple," Daniel said. "You have two choices. You can fight for our marriage, end things with Christopher completely, go to counseling, work to rebuild what you've broken, or you can leave. And if I choose to fight for our marriage," Daniel's expression didn't change, "then you'd better be prepared to prove it. Because trust, once broken, doesn't heal easily. And I don't forgive betrayal." "What does that mean?" "It means that if you stay, if you choose to work on our marriage, Christopher Schaefer becomes a painful memory and nothing more. It means you accept the consequences of your choices. And it means you understand that some damage can never be completely repaired." Victoria wiped her eyes with a tissue. "And if I leave, then you leave with nothing. The house is in my name. The cars are in my name. Your retirement accounts are mine too, since they were built with my income while you climbed your corporate ladder. You'd have your salary and whatever savings you've managed to accumulate. You'd really do that? After 23 years. Daniel's smile was as cold as Arctic wind. Victoria, you spent 8 months planning to leave me for another man. Did you really think I wouldn't plan for the possibility of you following through? That afternoon, Daniel received a call from Neil. Interesting development, Neil said. Christopher Schaefer called in sick today. Also, Anthony Sullivan contacted me about moving all his contracts to Morrison & Associates. Apparently, he's lost confidence in Meridian's construction management. How unfortunate for Christopher. It gets better. Sullivan mentioned that he'd heard rumors about unprofessional conduct among Meridian's senior staff. Something about personal relationships affecting business decisions. Daniel whistled low. Rumors like that can be damaging, especially when they're true. I think Mr. Schaefer is about to discover that reputation matters in this business. After hanging up, Daniel found Victoria in their bedroom, packing a suitcase. Going somewhere? He asked. I need some time to think. I'm going to stay with my sister for a few days. Kelly Alvarez, Victoria's younger sister, lived in the suburbs with her husband and 2 teenage children. She'd never approved of Victoria's career focus, preferring traditional family values. It would be an interesting conversation. Take all the time you need, Daniel said. But understand, when you come back committed. No more Christopher, no more lies, no more divided loyalties. Or you don't come back at all. Victoria paused in her packing. What about Christopher's job? Will you really make his life miserable? That depends on him. If he behaves professionally, keeps his distance from you, and does his work competently, we'll have no problems. But if he tries to interfere with my marriage or challenge my authority. Daniel didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Victoria left an hour later, her car disappearing down the street as the autumn sun set behind the trees. Daniel watched from the window until her taillights faded, then returned to his workshop. He had work to do. Chapter 7. The Company Event. The following Friday arrived with unseasonable warmth for October. Daniel stood in his bedroom, adjusting his tie in the mirror. The reflection looking back at him was that of a man in complete control. Calm, composed, and radiating quiet authority. Victoria had returned Thursday evening after a week at her sister's house. She looked exhausted, her eyes red from crying and lack of sleep. Their conversation had been brief and devastating. I choose our marriage, she'd said simply. I ended things with Christopher. It's over. Daniel had studied her face, searching for deception. Finding none, he nodded. Then we start over. But my conditions stand: complete honesty, no contact with Christopher outside of work and counseling. Now, 24 hours later, they were preparing to attend Morrison & Associates' official announcement party. The event would introduce Daniel as regional director to the city's business community and formally announce the partnership agreements with local companies. You look nervous, Daniel observed as Victoria emerged from the bathroom. I'm nervous, she admitted. Christopher will be there. All of Meridian's executives will be there. Everyone will be watching us. Let them watch. We have nothing to hide. Victoria's laugh was bitter. Don't we? Daniel turned to face her fully. Victoria, the affair is over. Christopher understands his position. Tonight, you're my wife, I'm Morrison's regional director, and we're a team. That's all anyone needs to know. The grand ballroom at the Fairmont Hotel was elegant in a way that spoke of old money and established power. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over round tables draped in white linen, each centerpiece a work of art featuring autumn flowers and flickering candles. Daniel and Victoria arrived fashionably late, making an entrance that drew every eye in the room. Victoria wore a stunning navy blue dress that hugged her figure perfectly, while Daniel's tailored black suit spoke of success and authority. There's our star. Elizabeth coolly approached with a bright smile and 2 champagne flutes. Daniel, you look magnificent. And Victoria, absolutely radiant. Thank you, Victoria replied, accepting the champagne gratefully. The mayor's here, Elizabeth continued, along with the city council members and representatives from every major company in the region. This is your night, Daniel. Enjoy it. As they moved through the crowd, Daniel noticed the subtle shift in how people treated him. Where once he'd been seen as Victoria's blue-collar husband, now he commanded respect in his own right. Business cards were pressed into his hand, lunch meetings were proposed, and partnership opportunities were discussed. Daniel Emerson. Anthony Sullivan appeared with a broad smile. I've been looking forward to seeing you again. Mr. Sullivan, pleasure to see you. I wanted to thank you personally. Since Morrison & Associates took over my construction contracts, projects are actually finishing on time. It's a refreshing change. Daniel's smile was modest. I simply believe in accountability, a rare quality. I was telling your wife earlier, you're a fortunate woman, Victoria. Not many men combine integrity with competence. Victoria's smile was strained. Yes, I'm very lucky. Across the room, Christopher Schaefer stood with a small group of Meridian executives. He looked haggard, the confident swagger of weeks past replaced by nervous energy. His eyes kept darting toward Victoria, then quickly away when he noticed Daniel watching. Excuse me, Daniel said to Sullivan. I should pay my respects to our partners from Meridian. He approached the Meridian group with Victoria at his side, causing a subtle ripple of tension. Mr. Doherty, Daniel extended his hand to Meridian CEO. Thank you for coming tonight. Wouldn't miss it, Doherty replied warmly. This partnership has been beneficial for everyone involved. I'm particularly pleased with the efficiency improvements on the Harbor District project, Daniel said, his eyes briefly meeting Christopher's. Completing that 3 weeks ahead of schedule will save both our companies significant money. Christopher's jaw tightened. He'd been managing that project for months, struggling with delays and cost overruns. Daniel had taken it over 2 weeks ago and immediately implemented changes that transformed the timeline. Christopher's been instrumental in the transition, Daniel continued smoothly. His willingness to adapt to new management styles has been educational for everyone involved. The words were professional, but their meaning was clear to everyone present. Christopher was no longer in charge, and his previous methods had been found wanting. Ladies and gentlemen, a voice called from the front of the room. If you could take your seats, we're about to begin the formal program. The presentation was a masterclass in corporate theater. Elizabeth coolly outlined Morrison & Associates' expansion plans, highlighting the partnerships that would drive regional growth. When she introduced Daniel, the applause was genuine and sustained. Daniel's speech was brief but effective. He spoke of collaboration, integrity, and the importance of delivering on promises. His words were carefully chosen to reinforce his position while subtly undermining Christopher's reputation. Success in this business requires more than ambition, Daniel said, his eyes sweeping the room. It requires character. The willingness to put the team's success above personal gain, the integrity to honor commitments, even when no one is watching, and the wisdom to understand that real power comes from building others up, not tearing them down. The message was received loud and clear. In the business community, reputation was everything, and Daniel was establishing his while quietly destroying Christopher's. After the formal program, the evening shifted to networking and socializing. Daniel found himself surrounded by potential clients and partners, all eager to work with Morrison's new regional director. Impressive speech, a voice said behind him. Daniel turned to find Willie Glass, the city's most powerful real estate developer. Glass controlled millions of square feet of commercial space and had the political connections to match. Mr. Glass, honored to meet you. I've been watching your work on the Harbor District project. 3 weeks ahead of schedule. That's the kind of efficiency I need. They talked for several minutes about potential collaborations. Glass mentioned several major projects in the pipeline, all requiring construction management expertise. I was considering working with Meridian Industries, Glass said casually, but I'm told their construction division has been inconsistent lately. I couldn't comment on Meridian's internal operations, Daniel replied diplomatically, but Morrison & Associates stands behind every project we undertake. Meanwhile, Victoria was trapped in a conversation with several Morrison executives' wives. They were discussing charity work and social events, the kind of conversations she'd once dismissed as frivolous. Now, she realized, they were part of Daniel's new world, a world where she'd have to rebuild her reputation as a supportive wife. "You must be so proud of Daniel," said Misty Allen, whose husband handled Morrison's legal affairs. "Neil Draper says he's the most naturally gifted project manager they've ever worked with." "Yes," Victoria replied carefully. "Daniel's always been exceptional at what he does. It must be wonderful to have a husband who's so respected in his field. Some men are all ego and no substance, but Daniel seems to be the real deal." The conversation continued in this vein, each comment a subtle reminder of Daniel's rising status and her own diminished position. She was no longer Victoria Emerson, Senior Vice President. She was Daniel Emerson's wife, and her value was measured by her support for his success. Across the room, Christopher nursed his second whiskey and watched the proceedings with bitter resentment. Every handshake Daniel received, every business card exchanged, every laugh shared over potential deals, it all represented opportunities that should have been his. Drowning your sorrows? Christopher looked up to find Bruce Harding at his elbow. The former Special Forces operator looked every inch the corporate security consultant in his tailored suit. "I'm sorry, do we know each other?" "Bruce Harding. I do security consulting for Morrison and Associates." Christopher's blood ran cold. Security consulting could mean many things, but in his current situation, none of them were good. "What kind of security consulting?" Bruce's smile was predatory. "Background checks, due diligence, risk assessment. Making sure our partners and employees don't have any complications that might affect business relationships." "I see. For instance," Bruce continued conversationally, "if someone were involved in an inappropriate relationship that could create conflicts of interest, that would be the kind of risk Morrison and Associates would want to identify and address." Christopher set down his glass with shaking hands. "I'm not sure what you're implying." "I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. Morrison and Associates takes professional conduct very seriously. Employees who create liabilities tend to find themselves reassigned." The threat was clear. Christopher excused himself and headed for the restroom, his mind racing. Daniel hadn't just outmaneuvered him professionally. He'd surrounded him with people whose job was to make his life miserable. In the restroom, Christopher splashed cold water on his face and tried to think. He had options. He could transfer to another division, look for work at a different company, or try to weather the storm until Daniel moved on to bigger things. What he couldn't do was fight back. Daniel held all the cards now, and any attempt to challenge him would only make things worse. When Christopher returned to the ballroom, he found Daniel waiting near the bar. "Enjoying the party?" Daniel asked pleasantly. "It's been educational." "I'm glad to hear that. Education is important, don't you think? Learning from our mistakes, understanding the consequences of our choices." Christopher said nothing. "I want to be clear about something," Daniel continued, his voice dropping to a whisper only Christopher could hear. "This is how things are going to be from now on. You're going to do your job competently and professionally. You're going to treat my wife with respect during business interactions and nothing more. And you're going to understand that your career at Meridian Industries exists at my pleasure. And if I don't agree to those terms," Daniel's smile was cold as winter, "then you'll discover that the construction industry is a very small world and reputation travels fast. By Monday morning, every major contractor in the city would know that Christopher Schaefer can't be trusted with other men's wives. How do you think that would affect your future employment prospects?" Christopher felt the trap closing around him. Daniel hadn't just won. He'd created a scenario where fighting back would only accelerate his own destruction. "Message received," Christopher said finally. "Good. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to get back to my wife. We have a marriage to rebuild." As Daniel walked away, Christopher realized the full extent of his defeat. He'd lost Victoria, his career prospects, his reputation, and his self-respect, all because he'd underestimated the blue-collar husband he'd thought was beneath notice. The evening wound down with handshakes and promises of future business. Daniel and Victoria made their rounds, saying goodbye to new partners and allies. By the time they reached their car, Daniel's phone was full of contact information from the city's most powerful business leaders. "How do you feel?" Daniel asked as they drove home. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. humiliated, ashamed, grateful that you're giving me a second chance. And Christopher? Christopher who? Victoria's voice was firm. I don't know anyone by that name. Daniel smiled for the first time in weeks. It was a beginning. Chapter 8. The Final Moves. 3 weeks after the Morrison event, Daniel sat in his new corner office reviewing quarterly reports. The view from a 22nd floor of the Morrison building gave him a clear sight line to Meridian Industries across the street. He specifically requested this office for exactly that reason. His assistant, Christina Hunter, poached from Meridian with a 40% salary increase, knocked on his door. "Mr. Emerson, Anthony Sullivan is here for your 2 o'clock. Send him in." Sullivan entered carrying a leather briefcase and wearing the satisfied expression of a man who'd made a profitable decision. "Daniel, good to see you. I have those contracts we discussed." They spent an hour reviewing Sullivan's upcoming projects, 4 major developments worth over $50 million in construction contracts. All of them would have previously gone to Meridian Industries through Christopher Schaefer. "I appreciate Morrison and Associates taking this on," Sullivan said as they concluded. "Frankly, I was getting tired of Meridian's inconsistencies." "What kind of inconsistencies?" Sullivan's expression darkened. "Christopher Schaefer seemed more interested in his personal life than my projects. Missed meetings, delayed responses, and, frankly, some questionable decision-making. When you're investing this kind of money, you need partners who have their priorities straight." After Sullivan left, Daniel checked his messages. 3 more companies had inquired about switching their construction contracts to Morrison and Associates. Word was spreading through the business community that Christopher Schaefer was no longer the reliable partner he'd once been. It wasn't entirely unfair. Since the Morrison event, Christopher's performance had deteriorated noticeably. He seemed distracted, defensive, and increasingly isolated from his colleagues. His relationship with Victoria, once carefully hidden but suspected by some, had become obvious in its absence. They barely spoke during meetings, and the tension was palpable. Daniel's phone rang. "Victoria, how's your day going?" she asked. "Productive. Yours?" "Challenging. I'm in a meeting with Mr. Doherty in an hour to discuss the Sullivan contracts. He's not pleased that we're losing them." "Business is business, Victoria. Companies choose their partners based on performance and reliability." "I know. It's just..." Christopher's struggling. "People are starting to notice." Daniel's voice was carefully neutral. "Are you concerned about him?" The pause was telling. "I'm concerned about what his problems might mean for Meridian. For our partnership with Morrison. The partnership is solid as long as Meridian maintains professional standards. If individual employees can't meet those standards..." "I understand." After hanging up, Daniel reviewed Christopher's personnel file. Neil had provided it as part of the due diligence process. The man's performance reviews had always been strong, but there were troubling patterns. High turnover in his department, complaints about his management style, and whispers about inappropriate relationships with female colleagues. Victoria had been his latest conquest, but not his first. Daniel's investigation had revealed at least 2 other affairs. One with a subordinate who'd transferred to avoid him, another with a client's daughter that had nearly cost Meridian a major contract. Christopher Schaefer was a predator who used his position to seduce women, and he'd been getting away with it for years. That afternoon, Daniel had an unexpected visitor. Elizabeth Briggs, Victoria's mother, appeared in his office without an appointment. "Daniel, I hope you don't mind me stopping by." "Of course not, Elizabeth. Please sit down." Victoria's mother looked uncomfortable, a rare sight for a woman who usually radiated superiority. "I wanted to apologize," she said finally, "for what I said at Victoria's promotion party. About the way you smell. It was inappropriate and cruel." Daniel studied her face. "What's brought about this change of heart?" Elizabeth's laugh was bitter. "Reality. I spent 40 years married to Victoria's father, and he never achieved half of what you've accomplished in the last month. I let my prejudices blind me to your worth." "And Christopher Schaefer?" "Christopher Schaefer is a snake who nearly destroyed my daughter's marriage. I should have seen it sooner." Elizabeth paused. "Victoria told me you're working on your marriage. I wanted you to know that you have my support." It was a significant victory. Elizabeth Briggs was a formidable woman with considerable social influence. Having her as an ally rather than an enemy would make Victoria's reintegration into Daniel's world much smoother. That evening, Daniel arrived home to find Victoria in the kitchen, cooking dinner for the first time in months. She'd changed from her business suit into casual clothes, and there was something different about her demeanor. "Smells good," he said, loosening his tie. "Pot roast with vegetables. I remember you used to love my pot roast." "I still do." They ate in comfortable silence, both aware that they were rebuilding something that had been broken. The process was slow, careful, like reconstructing a shattered vase. Possible, but the cracks would always be visible. "I heard about the Sullivan contracts," Victoria said finally. "Business decision. Anthony needed more reliable service. Christopher's not handling it well. He's been drinking during lunch, missing meetings. Mr. Doherty is talking about reassigning him." Daniel set down his fork. "How does that make you feel?" Victoria considered the question carefully. "Sad, I suppose. Not because I have feelings for him. Those are gone, but because I played a part in his downfall. Christopher Schaefer's downfall is Christopher Schaefer's responsibility. He made choices, Victoria, just like you made choices. The difference is you chose to face the consequences and work to make things right. And he didn't. He chose to blame others, to see himself as a victim, to let his problems affect his work. That's not my fault, and it's not yours." Later that night, as they lay in bed reading, Victoria spoke quietly. "Daniel, what happens now? With us, I mean." He closed his book and looked at her. "Now we continue rebuilding. We go to counseling, we work on communication, and we see if what we have left is worth saving." "Do you think it is?" Daniel was quiet for a long moment. "I think we both need to earn back the right to answer that question." Meanwhile, across town, Christopher Schaefer sat in his empty apartment, staring at foreclosure notices and credit card bills. The house in Hillcrest, the one he planned to share with Victoria, was gone. The deposit forfeited when he couldn't secure financing after losing the Sullivan contracts. His phone buzzed with a text from his ex-wife's lawyer. Melanie wanted to renegotiate their custody arrangement, claiming his recent erratic behavior made him an unfit father. Everything was falling apart, and it had all started with Daniel Emerson's quiet smile at that company party. Christopher poured another drink and considered his options. He could transfer to Meridian's West Coast division, start over where Daniel's influence couldn't reach. He could quit and try to find work with a different company. Or he could stay and endure the slow destruction of his reputation. None of the options were appealing. His laptop chimed with an email from HR. A meeting scheduled for Monday morning to discuss his recent performance issues. The language was corporate speak for a final warning. Christopher laughed bitterly. Daniel Emerson hadn't just won. He'd executed a perfect campaign of destruction without ever making a direct threat or taking an obvious action. It was psychological warfare at its finest, and Christopher had been completely outmatched. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd seduced married women for years, using his position and charm to take what belonged to other men. Now he'd finally encountered someone who fought back, and the retribution was swift and merciless. As the weekend ended, both men prepared for Monday morning with very different expectations. Daniel would arrive at his office to find more contract proposals and partnership opportunities waiting. Christopher would arrive at his to face the beginning of the end of his career at Meridian Industries. The game was nearly over, and there was only one possible winner. Chapter 9. Victory Without Mercy. Monday morning arrived gray and cold, matching Christopher Schaefer's mood as he sat in Meridian Industries' HR conference room. Across the table sat James Doherty, HR Director Leanne Clark, and, to his surprise, Victoria. "Christopher," Doherty began, "I'll be direct. Your performance over the past month has been unacceptable. Missed meetings, delayed project reports, and client complaints have reached a critical level." Christopher's hands remained steady as he opened his portfolio. He'd prepared for this meeting, gathering documentation to defend himself. "Mr. Doherty, I think if you review my overall record, we have," Leanne Clark interrupted, "which is why this conversation is happening instead of immediate termination." The words hit like a physical blow. Christopher had been with Meridian for 8 years, building relationships and establishing himself as a key player. Now he was one mistake away from unemployment. "What are my options?" he asked quietly. Doherty exchanged glances with Victoria before answering. "We're offering you a choice. Accept a transfer to our Portland office as a senior project coordinator, a lateral move with no loss in salary, or we can discuss a severance package." Portland, 3,000 miles from everything he'd built, from Victoria, from any chance of redemption. But still employed, still salvageable. "I need time to consider." "You have until Friday," Doherty said. "But Christopher, understand this. Staying in your current position is not an option." After the meeting, Victoria lingered in the hallway as Christopher gathered his things. "Victoria," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "this doesn't have to be how it ends." "Yes, it does." Her voice was firm, professional. "You need to move on, Christopher. For both our sakes. He's destroying me. Your husband is systematically destroying my career, and you're letting him." Victoria's expression hardened. "Daniel didn't make you drink during work hours. He didn't make you miss client meetings or submit incomplete reports. You did that because I lost everything that mattered to me. No, you lost something you never really had. A married woman who should have known better." Victoria paused. "Take the Portland job, Christopher. Start over. Find someone who's actually available." As she walked away, Christopher realized the finality of it. Victoria wasn't just ending their affair. She was cutting him out of her life completely, as if their 8 months together had never happened. That afternoon, Daniel received a call from Anthony Sullivan. "Daniel, I have a proposition for you. My company is looking to expand our construction management capabilities. Would Morrison & Associates be interested in acquiring some experienced personnel?" "What did you have in mind?" "Well, there's a senior project coordinator position opening up on the West Coast. Someone with Christopher Schaefer's experience could be valuable, but frankly, I prefer working with people you've vetted personally." Daniel smiled. Even in exile, Christopher would find Daniel's influence following him. "I'm sure we could discuss terms." Meanwhile, Victoria was cleaning out her desk drawers when she found a photo from their wedding day. 24 years old, radiant with happiness, holding Daniel's hand as they cut their cake. They'd looked so young, so hopeful, so certain of their future together. She'd thrown that away for excitement, for the thrill of being desired by a powerful man, for the fantasy of a different life. Now she was fighting to rebuild what she'd nearly destroyed, and the outcome was far from certain. Her phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. "Dinner at Romano's tonight? 7:30. Romano's was where they'd had their first date 25 years ago. It was also where Daniel had proposed 3 years later. The choice of restaurant wasn't accidental. She typed back, "I'll be there." That evening, Victoria arrived at Romano's to find Daniel already seated at a corner table, wearing the same charcoal suit he'd worn to the Morrison event. He stood as she approached, pulling out her chair with old-fashioned courtesy. "You look beautiful," he said, and meant it. Victoria had chosen her outfit carefully. A simple black dress that was elegant without being provocative, professional without being cold. She was trying to find the balance between the woman she'd been and the woman she was becoming. "Thank you. How was your day?" "Productive. Morrison & Associates acquired 3 new contracts this week." "How was yours?" Victoria hesitated. Christopher accepted the Portland transfer. Daniel nodded, cutting into his steak. "Probably for the best. Fresh start for everyone. You knew. I encouraged Anthony Sullivan to make the offer. Christopher's talented when he's focused. A new environment might help him rediscover that focus. You're still controlling his future, even from 3,000 miles away." Daniel set down his fork and looked at her directly. "Victoria, Christopher Schaefer made a choice to pursue a married woman. He made a choice to conduct business in a way that cost his company contracts. He made a choice to let his personal problems affect his professional performance. I didn't make those choices for him. But you orchestrated the consequences. I protected what was mine. There's a difference." They ate in silence for several minutes before Victoria spoke again. "The counselor wants to see us together next week." "I know. I scheduled it. Are you going to tell her about what you did? How you planned this?" Daniel considered the question. I'm going to tell her that when my marriage was threatened, I fought to save it. I'm going to tell her that I used every resource at my disposal to eliminate the threat and win back my wife. And I'm going to ask her to help us build something stronger than what we had before. What if she says it's manipulation, control? Then she'd be right. I manipulated the situation to my advantage and controlled the outcome as much as possible. Daniel leaned forward. Victoria, I told you from the beginning, I don't forgive betrayal. But I'm willing to rebuild with someone who's genuinely committed to change. And you think I am? Genuinely committed? I think you're here. Christopher's 3,000 miles away, and your mother apologized for insulting me. I think actions speak louder than words, and your actions suggest you've made your choice. Victoria reached across the table and took his hand. It was the first intimate gesture she'd initiated since the affair ended. I'm sorry, she said quietly, for all of it. For betraying you, for embarrassing you, for throwing away something precious. Daniel squeezed her hand gently. I know. Can you forgive me? Daniel was quiet for a long moment, studying their interlaced fingers. I can try, but forgiveness is a process, not an event. And rebuilding trust takes time. How much time? However long it takes. 3 months later, Daniel stood on the balcony of his new office. Morrison and Associates had promoted him to senior regional director, overseeing operations in 4 states. The view included both Meridian Industries and a Riverside Country Club, 2 places that would forever remind him of how close he'd come to losing everything. Victoria appeared beside him, carrying 2 cups of coffee. She'd been making an effort to visit his office occasionally, rebuilding the connection between their personal and professional lives. Busy day, she asked. Productive. Sullivan wants to discuss a partnership that could double our regional contracts. That's wonderful. Victoria paused. I heard from Christopher yesterday. Daniel's expression didn't change. Oh, he's engaged. To a lawyer from Portland. Apparently, he's doing well with Sullivan's West Coast operations. Good for him. Victoria studied her husband's profile. You really don't care anymore, do you? Christopher Schaefer stopped being relevant to my life the moment you chose our marriage over him. His happiness or misery is no longer my concern. Just like that, Daniel turned to face her. Victoria, I told you from the beginning, I don't forgive and I don't forget. But I also don't waste energy on defeated enemies. Christopher Schaefer is exactly where he deserves to be and where he'll stay. And us? Where do we deserve to be? Daniel set down his coffee and pulled her close. We deserve whatever we're willing to work for. No more, no less. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the city bustle below them. Somewhere in Portland, Christopher Schaefer was probably sitting in another office, looking out at another view, trying to build another life. His punishment wasn't poverty or destruction. It was knowing that he'd had everything within reach and lost it through his own choices. It was, Daniel reflected, the most perfect revenge of all. Christopher would spend the rest of his life wondering what might have been, while Daniel rebuilt something stronger than before. That evening, Victoria found Daniel in his workshop, but he wasn't working on engines. Instead, he was framing the photo from their wedding day, the one she'd found in her desk drawer. I thought I might put this back up, he said. If you want to. Victoria smiled for the first time in months. A real smile, not the careful expression she'd been wearing during their rebuilding process. I like that very much. As they hung the photo in their living room, Victoria asked one final question. Daniel, what if Christopher had one? What if I'd chosen to leave with him? Daniel's answer was immediate and certain. Then you'd both be discovering that destroying someone else's marriage doesn't guarantee your own happiness. Some foundations can't support the weight of betrayal. And now we're building on solid ground. Outside, the autumn wind carried the scent of wood smoke and changing seasons. Inside, Daniel and Victoria Emerson began the careful work of rebuilding their marriage, brick by brick, with the knowledge that some battles are won not through forgiveness, but through the complete and total victory of right over wrong. Christopher Schaefer was gone, defeated not by violence or cruelty, but by the simple truth that some men fight harder for what they love than others fight for what they want. In the end, that made all the difference. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen, and I'll see you there.